Risks of living next to oil and gas operations. The largest study yet looks at Coloradans' health. A prescribed burn gets out of control on a dry day. Why were they setting stuff on fire? Following the money raised to recall the governor, what's happening now is nuttier than squirrel droppings. Tracking human trafficking in Colorado's construction industry. Young men get pulled into that underworld too. And keeping a marriage spicy after 72 years. Oh, Shirley, look at you. All that is next. Let's talk about the health risks of oil and gas development. There is a lot of fear and there's a lot of denialism. A new report says the truth is in the middle. Now, this is about health and it's about environment, and of course it's also about politics. Today, environmentalists looked at the new study and called for a shutdown of all new development in Colorado. The Republican chief of staff at the Capitol called them Nazis. So that's productive. Let's set that aside and look at the facts. Marshall Zellinger breaks down nearly 400 pages of new research in 90 seconds.
Be thankful you didn't have to read this report that includes charts, math, science, numbers, and more numbers. This health risk report on oil and gas operations reveals that there is a low health risk from oil and gas emissions during this stage, after the ground has been fractured and the substances start coming back to the surface.
The study doesn't quantify how frequently or infrequently the risk happens, but it does note that those worst-case exposure scenarios would happen infrequently.
This study from CSU looked at 5,000 air samples taken prior to 2016 and determined when the worst-case scenarios are present, you might experience a low health risk. Worst-case scenarios based on weather conditions, amount of emissions, where you're standing, and for how long.
This study confirms prior research as well as our findings out in the field that there's not an enhanced level of cancer, but that there is a quite infrequent risk of short-term effects like the dizziness, headaches, and nosebleeds.
Our first step will be to take immediate action on permits that are pending that are less than 2,000 feet from homes to wells.
Jeff Robbins approves oil and gas permits in Colorado and will scrutinize new wells more strictly based on this report.
This afternoon, you've also heard a lot of terms thrown out there like hypothetical, could be, may happen, worst case scenario, all based on modeling.
The oil and gas industry took exception with the report's projections, but the report did use real data, just not data at every point around every well at every second.
Policy needs to be based on real data, actual data, not modeling, not hypotheticals, not theoreticals.
Here's why it has to be hypothetical and theoretical, Kyle. I couldn't get a permit for an oil well, so Allie here is my oil well. They tested different spots, so maybe one day they were here, but maybe the wind was blowing on the other side of Allie, so they didn't get an accurate representation of the worst-case scenario that day. Then another day here, maybe they're getting a lot of emissions, but if you're on the other side, you're not getting anything. So they take all that data and come up with that hypothetical to come up with possible rulemaking for the worst-case scenario at any given point. Because if I'm here and the worst thing's happening, they might want to make rules for that, even though that might happen a fraction of the time. Kyle.
It's complicated, but it makes sense when you explain it. Thank you, Marshall. That burn operation in Larimer County that got out of control yesterday is now 50% contained. Most people in the Glacier View area, 30 miles northwest of Fort Collins, can go home tonight. 600 plus acres burned up there, starting with an area that was burned on purpose to clear trees and brush. You've been asking our next team why in the world there was intentional burning going on such a dry day yesterday. So we asked our meteorologist, Corey Reppenhagen.
It's called fighting fire with fire. Prescribed burns are a method of preventing large wildfires in the future by burning back overgrown forests today. That was the goal of the Nature Conservancy when they scheduled a 500-acre burn in Larimer County on Tuesday. One burn manager I talked to today, not associated with the elk fire, said that if there's a red flag warning in place, that usually prevents a prescribed burn from happening. In this case, there was not a red flag warning issued in Larimer County at all this week. The weather remained just short of the criteria for a warning. There were warm and windy conditions and the ground is extremely dry, but that is the MO of Colorado weather. And that is also part of the reason these prescribed burns are so important in the first place. Meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen for Next.
We continue to track the money raised for the recall against Democratic Governor Jared Polis. The official recall group never attempted a recall, but it kept the money, gave thousands of dollars to its leadership as gifts, then reclassified the money as consulting fees when we asked about it. But that's not even the strangest part. Almost $30,000 in donations meant to recall Governor Polis was instead shifted to a new political committee called Colorado for Trump. It's run by the same woman who ran the failed recall group, Juliandra Fuentes. The Trump campaign is upset, says it has no association with her group, even threatened legal action. Fuentes has told me the president should call her personally. But now Fuentes has changed her group's purpose with the Secretary of State's office, says that the word Trump is actually the initials Trump, says that they stand for truth, will restore the Republican unbiased media gives power to the people. I'm not sure that spells Trump. I think it spells Twitter. At least now we know what happens when a recall fails and the donations land in another bank account. They go Twitter. Fuentes did not return my calls for comment today. She didn't return my calls when they gave their donation money to their leadership either. That time, though, I did get a call back from a blocked number, and a man on the line said that he would be investigating me for asking questions. School board races can be pretty sleepy affairs. I mean, sometimes they can't even get people to run for the school board. And then you got Denver, with a $1.5 billion budget at stake, right at the center of the fight between school reformers and teachers' unions. This school board race is expensive and ugly. Here's Sonia Gutierrez.
For a job that pays nothing, they sure have raised a lot. Nearly $500,000 raised by 3 candidates wanting one spot on Denver's school board. So who are the 3 running in Southeast Denver?
I am a successful software entrepreneur.
Scott Balderman.
I have worked and have advocated on behalf of women, children, and families my entire career.
Diana Romero Campbell.
What we need this race to be about is the interest of our children.
And Radhika Nath.
So far, I've put over $325,000 into my campaign.
Scott has the biggest budget.
Yeah.
And he's not ashamed by it.
I have no apologies for self-funding.
In fact, that's a big point for him.
Fight off our out-of-state interests that are coming in. I wish I didn't have to self-fund like this.
Interests, he says, like the ones that are coming into Diana's campaign.
Individuals, family members, people that I went to high school with.
She has the second largest budget, coming from charter school supporters and some out-of-state interests.
You don't do that without building relationships and knowing a number of people in our community.
Both these things are a problem for the third candidate with the smallest budget.
If you're pouring this kind of money into the race that you're getting from corporate interest or your own funding, who are you serving?
Dr. Nath thinks it's not fair for community candidates like her to compete against all that money and connections.
Our democracy is for sale, and what's more, our children and their education is up for sale to the highest bidder. It's not okay.
So unlike the state legislator candidates who do have to respond to, who do actually have campaign limits, the school board does not have any limits like that. Something that all 3 of the candidates want to change, but for now voters have to choose which candidate is their biggest bang for their buck.
So, Sonia, I mean, this money gets spent on stuff, and it gets spent on stuff like the nastiest mailer that I have ever seen in a school board campaign that I got in my mailbox in Denver last night. And it set people on fire today.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's the flyer that you're seeing right there, and it includes 3 different candidates. And the problem was that for these 2 candidates, their last name was excluded. So the big deal with this, Kyle, is the fact that for Latinas, we purposely pick 2 last names, and we do that to honor everyone and our entire families. So we do that to honor our mom's family, our father's family, and when that is omitted or taken off of any sort of anything that has our name on it, it's like stripping a part of your identity. And so for those 2 candidates, that's exactly why they're so upset about this, is because if you strip away the last name, one of the last names, then you're stripping away half of their ethnicity, half of their culture, half of their identity. And that's why many Latina legislators are now also coming out in support of them too, saying, you know what, this is why they're upset and this should not be happening.
All right, those were the 2 women running as school reformers that didn't like their names being stripped out. All right, Sonia, thank you very much. When we talk about human trafficking, so often it's young women being forced into sex.
Labor trafficking generally, where we see both men and women exploited, a lot of men and a lot of women. In construction, it's certainly more men.
Colorado's construction industry is watching for the warning signs. And you don't have to be famous to have made history worth celebrating.
Whether they're athletes or politicians or activists, we really wanted to get a broad spectrum of a snapshot of who we are as Coloradans.
And the Coloradans who go hunting for the first frozen lake of the season. That's next. The most Colorado thing we saw today are people out hunting for the first frozen lake of the season. A next viewer named Dave Kozlowski says he and his friends go searching for the earliest lake to freeze up in the mountains near Gunnison each year because they want to go skating. Dave says this is their shoulder season sport. It's too cold to bike, not enough snow for skiing, so let's ice skate on the first lake ice of the year. Obviously, there's safety concerns here, so Dave says they're looking for ice that is at least 2 inches thick. They measure it very scientifically. They take a grapefruit-sized rock and they throw it 10 feet in the air.
The rock has been tried and true method for, I guess, decades. But if it bounces and makes a twang sound, then the ice is safe to proceed on. Once you hear it, you would understand. I wish I had a sound of it, but it does. It's a twang.
Twang. We should mention they take additional safety precautions as well. Dave and his friends, they wear flotation devices. They have rope and ice picks in case, as he says, someone goes swimming. What's the most Colorado thing you saw today? Email your pictures to next@9news.com or get our attention with the hashtag HeyNext.
I'm glad they take other safety measures. I was having anxiety during that story. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at your forecast because fire danger will remain high all the way through 9 o'clock tonight for northwest and southern Colorado. Here, locations are expected to see gusts to 30 miles per hour, very low humidity as we wait for a cold front to move through. But this cold front does also bring in some moisture, so humidity and a little bit of rain and snow moving into Colorado's mountain areas tomorrow should help that fire danger significantly. At 2:30, we may even get an isolated rain shower here tomorrow afternoon in the Denver area, while we stay gusty and quite a bit cooler as highs are only in the middle 60s. We're looking at a high of 64 and gusty winds with a chance for those light rain showers tomorrow afternoon. We'll stay dry Saturday for most of the state, and unfortunately those dry, gusty conditions means fire danger will return even to a lot of those areas where we are seeing wildfires currently burn. Sunday, a new front pushes through. This will bring in a new chance for some rain and some snow here to Denver and even some snow up in Colorado's mountains. Sunday will also be quite a bit cooler. We'll close out the weekend in the low 50s.
Our next question comes from Craig, who's seen our reporting on human trafficking and how it's not just young women, but it's also connected to Colorado's construction industry. Craig works in construction, and he said he wanted to know the warning signs to make sure that the people he's supposed to protect are safe. Anusha Roy went in search of answers.
Those warning signs can include victims living with the boss, no ID or other documentation on hand, lack of proper safety equipment or training, the kind of thing that makes the vulnerable even more so. And that brings up the next red flag, a reluctance to take that person to the hospital.
It doesn't have to be through physical force. It could be through different forms of coercion.
Patricia Medage with the Colorado Legal Services works on these kinds of cases and says this kind of trafficking can be found at home construction sites, for commercial buildings, people acting on their own or as a part of a criminal group.
One case we had a few years ago that resulted in a civil lawsuit involved actually senior housing that had tax breaks.
All 4 victims were men. Proving a labor trafficking case can be difficult. It requires documentation and witnesses willing to testify. So is overcoming a common misconception.
Labor trafficking generally, where we see both men and women exploited. In construction, it's certainly more men than women, and it's a combination of youths and adults.
Last year, 22 men were involved in human trafficking cases in Colorado that investigators know of. That is compared to 113 women. Now, victims that include people with lack of education, maybe in this country illegally, or have a visa that doesn't actually allow them to change employers. And of course, this is something that we first heard about from the Denver District Attorney yesterday when she was telling us that homeless youth, homeless kids were being targeted for this kind of trafficking in the construction industry.
We were showing folks that hotline, that
Yes.
state hotline that exists.
Exactly. And I think that is a number that we really want out there, because if you do see something like this, one, you're never supposed to try to rescue a person because it's just too dangerous. Call that line, and if someone is in immediate danger, you know what to do. Call 911.
All right, it appears we don't have that number for you, but we will put it in Anusha's article on 9news.com. Thank you very much. Sure, you can go to the History Museum and learn somebody else's story. What about yours?
It's really designed to empower our visitors to see themselves as being able to make an impact.
Let's share some personal stories that will make you proud to be a Coloradan. And not much is new after 72 years of marriage. But then Leonard saw his Shirley. That's next. History makers. They rarely start out as known names. They become famous. History Colorado wants to inspire us with the true story of Coloradans and to encourage us to make a bit of our own history in the future. It's called What's Your Story? Features 101 stories. Here are two.
Janet Bonema was one of the people that we decided to feature in this exhibit in the section where we're talking about how to make an impact and the moments that you'll encounter on that journey. And in the 1970s, she applied for a job with the Colorado Department of Transportation, and she was accepted in an engineering position for the project that became known as the Eisenhower Tunnel. Janet wasn't actually allowed to go into the tunnel, and she actually brought a class action lawsuit, a sex discrimination lawsuit, and she won. And in November 1972, she finally got to enter the tunnel and fulfill her duties as an engineer. This exhibit really aims to make history relevant. So we wanted to share people from our past as well as people who are living today who are making history.
This is an exhibit about a project that I did when I was in high school. It's an invention that is a glove that translates American Sign Language fingerspelling to written text. What I would like another student to see if they saw this project was, I like this right here, how does innovation happen? To think about, like, what could I innovate? What could I do? What are my interests?
And we really designed this exhibit with teenagers in mind. So we have a ton of multimedia interactives. There's a quiz where you can learn about what your superpower is and get matched with a squad of historical and contemporary people who share that superpower. You can make a statement about an issue that you care about, and your name and your face goes up on a big screen. So it's really designed to empower our visitors to see themselves as being able to make an impact in whatever issue they care about.
That exhibit we saw through the lens of photojournalist Brian Wendland opens to the public on Saturday. Dementia has stolen some things from Leonard and Shirley. It could not take their 72nd anniversary. That and your feedback about this program going off the rails today, next. Shirley does not remember everything every day. She's 91, and she's fighting dementia. But she remembers her Leonard. She remembers the love that they've shared for 72 years.
You look beautiful,
These
Mother.
days, Leonard and Shirley live in an assisted care home in Burlington. And the staff there helped Shirley put on a special dress to surprise her husband. I love his reaction. They used to live on one of Colorado's century farms, a homestead that's been in the same family for a century. I talked to their daughter yesterday who said this was such a special occasion for a couple that otherwise would have had a difficult time celebrating 72 years after I do. We finish with your feedback tonight. Jimmy Lotspeach says, next, what's up with the censoring of the wildfire story with commercials? Jimmy, that was a most unfortunate technical error. Generally, we don't run a commercial break smack dab in the middle of our second story. But things happen. James writes in to say, this next segment is a major drop-off in journalism. I'm not sure what it is you're trying to accomplish, but in my humble opinion, it's not working. James, what we're trying to do is we're trying to share stories that matter and hopefully tell you something about your state that you didn't know otherwise. I certainly respect your feedback. that it's not working. See you next time.